I think these granite benchtop grants are a terrible idea that are going to make inequality worse. Public money should be used to build public housing, to house the homeless, get people off public housing waiting lists, not to give out money for granite benchtops. Now, this money is predominantly going to go to people who, by definition, will have been able to weather the coronavirus economic recession because they've kept their incomes. It's not going to the people on JobKeeper or JobSeeker, and it's going to push up housing prices even further, and it's going to allow people to take public money and use it for private gain. Yes, we need construction industry, but we should grow construction jobs with a public housing-led recovery, that by building 500,000 new public housing homes over the next 15 years, you'd create 40,000 construction jobs and 4,000 apprenticeships, and you'd help house the homeless. That's what we should be doing.
Situation in the US, I want to ask you about this. Do you think we're seeing permanent damage to a superpower in the world?
Yes, potentially we are. We're seeing steps towards this is kind of dictator kind of behaviour from Donald Trump. I mean, let's look at it. In the United States, they are tear gassing peaceful protesters for a presidential photo op. They are beating up Australian and other camera crews, and Donald Trump is threatening to call out the military against his own people. These are steps towards fascism. This is how it happens, and we need to be calling it out. And Scott Morrison should be calling out Donald Trump for these actions. There's no point in having cosy late-night phone calls with someone who is busy undermining democracy in a place that is meant to be a bastion of freedom and liberty. There are some serious issues of racial oppression to be addressed in the country, and instead, Donald Trump is threatening violence.
There have been a lot of those issues and underlying ones for a long time. COVID-19 also underlying perhaps the lack of safety net in the US. Again, this is not Donald Trump. What's Scott Morrison supposed to say that wouldn't just inflame the relationship right now?
I think Scott Morrison is meant to say, well, we've supposedly got this close relationship that supposedly brings with it a number of benefits, and one of those should be to be able to call out bad behaviour. Now, if this was being done by a leader of another country, if the leader of another country was tear-gassing people for a photo op, or saying that that he's threatening to call out the military against people, there would be comment from public leaders around the world, and there have been from others, and there needs to be from Scott Morrison as well, at the very least, to be saying this is not this is not actions that are consistent with a democracy, and to resolve these kind of issues, you should not be taking action against your own people. That is something I think that a leader of Australia can and should say.
What about what's happening in Hong Kong? There is a push, the UK saying there could be an increased intake of people from Hong Kong. Perhaps in Australia it could mean a special humanitarian intake, similar to what we saw in Syria. Would that be the right priority at the moment in terms of our intake?
Yes, Australia should go down that road. Again, this is a sign of the hypocritical attitude towards China. We see some people on the backbench speaking in the strongest possible terms about China's record just because when Donald Trump decides to engage in conflict with China, but when it comes to the government actually doing something, they're nowhere to be seen. Scott Morrison should respond in the same way that Bob Hawke did after the Tiananmen Square massacre. We should be offering Hong Kongers who are in Australia safe haven here. The UK is going down the right road, and there's things that Australia could do immediately for those people from Hong Kong who are here. We should be extending protection to them and doing it soon.
It's interesting, though, because if you give them this sort of special avenue, essentially what we're saying is you are the people in most need in the world right now of humanitarian refuge in Australia. It's a pretty bad situation in Hong Kong. I'm not saying it isn't, but would that first part of the statement hold true?
Well, I don't think you need to start saying some people are in more dire situation than others, or necessarily saying that there's not more people in the world,
doesn't it?
No, it's about saying there are certain special. Well, it's about saying that there are special circumstances that demand a special response. And we've done it before. And we've done it before with respect to Tiananmen Square, and we should do it now. And again, look, there's concrete things that the government could do if it wanted to put its money where its mouth is and support the people who are protesting for freedom and democracy in Hong Kong, and they're not doing them. And in fact, just rewind a few months, and the protesters were asking us not to go ahead and approve the Hong Kong Free Trade Agreement until the issues domestically were sorted out, because they felt that that would give a big boost to China. And the government went ahead and did it anyway, despite those protests. So all those people who line up on your show and others and wring their hands on the government backbenches and say they are concerned about human rights in China, well, now is the time they can act. They could revisit the Hong Kong Free Trade Agreement, and they could grant safe haven to people from Hong Kong who are in Australia at the moment.